All right, let's dive in. We're going to talk about cattle viruses. Now, I know what you might be thinking, but these microscopic threats, they pose a massive, and I mean massive, challenge to our global food supply.
So let's start with a big question. We spend a lot of time thinking about large-scale threats, right? But what if one of the biggest risks to our food security was completely invisible to the naked eye? Well, that's exactly what we're dealing with here. We're talking about viruses.
So, let's get down to the basics. What are we really talking about when we say cattle viruses? And more importantly, why should you be concerned?
On the surface, it sounds simple enough. A virus gets into a cow, but the chain reaction that follows can be anything but simple. Yeah, sometimes it's just a mild sickness, but other times, these infections can explode into full-blown crises that have a ripple effect across the entire globe.
And this, right here, is the key takeaway. This is so much bigger than just an agricultural issue. When a major outbreak hits, borders slam shut, international trade grinds to a halt, economies can take a massive hit, and, yeah, in some really scary cases, these diseases can actually jump over to people.
So let's look at our first major category. I like to call these the economic wrecking ball diseases, and we have to start with the most notorious one of all, foot and mouth disease. This virus is, honestly, a masterclass in spreading chaos. It's not just a cattle problem. It hits pigs, sheep, goats, basically any animal with a cloven hoof. It's ridiculously contagious, and get this, pigs act as amplifying hosts, which means they just pump out insane quantities of the virus into the environment.
And this is exactly why it's a nightmare to contain. An infected animal is like a virus factory. That virus can survive for ages out in the open, and it can even travel for miles on the wind. To make things even worse, an animal that recovers can still be a carrier, spreading the disease silently. It's literally a perfect storm for a devastating outbreak.
This quote right here, it really gets to the heart of the economic devastation. See, to be able to sell meat and livestock on the world market, countries have to prove their herds are totally clean of FMD. A single outbreak can slam the door on billions of dollars in trade overnight. It's not just about animal health, it's an issue of national economic security.
Okay, so let's shift gears. From a huge economic threat to a disease that sparked global fear for a totally different reason, its direct link to human health. Of course, I'm talking about bovine spongiform encephalopathy, but you probably know it as mad cow disease.
So the story kicks off back in 1985. Vets in Great Britain started seeing cattle with these really bizarre and frightening neurological symptoms. They eventually traced the source back to contaminated animal feed. But the real shocker, the thing that changed everything, was when scientists figured out this wasn't a virus or bacteria, it was something completely different, a rogue protein they called a prion. And this is where the biology gets both fascinating and, frankly, pretty terrifying. You see, all of us have normal prion proteins in our cells. They're totally harmless, just doing their job. But the pathogenic version is a misfolded, corrupted version. It's like a zombie. It finds normal prions and forces them to misfold too, setting off a chain reaction that just builds up and destroys brain tissue. And this is why the world panicked. Scientists discovered a horrifying link. This disease in cattle was connected to a new, always fatal human brain disorder called variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. It meant this strange, corrupted prion could actually jump from cows to people if they ate contaminated meat. So, we've seen the economic blockbusters and the public health nightmares. But for farmers on the ground, the day-in, day-out battle is often against something much more common. A whole group of viruses that cause what's known as the bovine respiratory disease complex, or BRD.
You can think of this complex as a real triple threat. First, you've got BRSV, which can get really nasty and cause severe swelling in the lungs. Then there's PI3. It's often milder, but it's sneaky. It acts like a gateway, weakening the lungs and opening the door for other infections to come roaring in. And finally, there's IBR, a type of herpes virus also known as red nose. It can cause abortions, and, just like other herpes viruses, it can go dormant and hide in the body, only to reactivate later. And don't think this is some rare problem. Just look at these numbers. This chart shows seroprevalence. That's the percentage of animals that have been exposed. Before we had widespread vaccines, the rates were just staggering. Up to 75% for BRSV in the US, over 86% for PI3 in places like Thailand. It just goes to show you that these viruses are a constant, lurking threat in herds all over the world. So, with all these different challenges, it can feel a little grim, right? How in the world do we fight back? Well, let's turn to one of the greatest success stories in this entire battle, because it shows us what's actually possible.
To find this story of hope, we've got to go back in time and talk about a disease called Rinderpest. It was known as the cattle plague, and for centuries, it was one of the most feared and destructive diseases on Earth, wiping out hundreds of millions of cattle and causing horrific famines.
And today, the number of Rinderpest cases in the entire world is 0. Absolutely 0. It has been completely, totally wiped off the face of the planet. It's one of the greatest public health achievements in history.
So how did we pull it off? Well, it really came down to a perfect blueprint. First, the virus itself was a good target. It didn't have a bunch of different strains, and it didn't hide out in carrier animals. Second, we developed an incredibly effective vaccine. But the most crucial part, the entire world came together. A massive, coordinated global campaign made it happen. It's just such a powerful reminder of what we can achieve when we work together.
Now, Rinderpest might be gone, but the war is definitely not over. The fight against foot and mouth, the constant vigilance against prions that cause BSE, and the daily management of those respiratory diseases, all of that continues. And our best weapons are still vaccination, strong biosecurity on farms, and constant surveillance to catch any new outbreaks before they explode.
And all of this leaves us with one final, pretty heavy thought. The success against Rinderpest proves we can win these fights. But in our world today, everything is so interconnected, the risk of a new threat emerging is always there. So the real question isn't if another one will pop up, but when, and are we going to be ready for it?